The morgue wasn't very far from Coltstein's home, so the trip wasn't very long, mainly around 10 minutes. The building was surprisingly small, seeing death was not a common thing throughout Equestria. Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle's murders were the first murders to happen in a long time, because ever since Princess Luna had returned from the moon, security had been doubled throughout Ponyville and Canterlot. Celestia guarded during the day, while Luna guarded the night, making any crime impossible. Coltstein entered the building through the double doors, presenting his badge to the mirror at the front desk. She didn't say a word, knowing that when it came to Coltstein, it was serious business. She entered the code to the door through the link device on her desk, immediately following a beeping noise and the door opening to the more private part of the building. Coltstein nodded his head, opening the door to a much colder section of the building. Cadwell was not used to morgues, so he started to shiver.
Why is it so cold?
He asked, shivering.
To keep the bodies from rotting. If you'd rather wait in the lobby, be my guest,
replied Coltstein. Cadwell did not waste any time at the mentioning of exiting the cold room, and darted back to the lobby.
What a rookie. Now, time to solve this case once and for all,
said Coltstein. Coltstein walked down a long hall until he came to a pair of doors with a neon sign above it labeled Morgue. Without hesitation, Coltstein pushed inward on the doors, entering a room where 2 medical examiners stood above a body. His entry startled both of them, causing them to stop working on the body. It did not take long for both of them to recognize Coltstein.
Long time no see.
Good to see you, Bronston. And you too, Redheart.
Dr. Bronston and Nurse Redheart placed their medical tools on a metal platter, covering the body with a light cloth, then made their way over to Coltstein.
Indeed. So what brings you here, Coltstein?
I just cut straight to the point. I'm so close to solving the Unmarked case, but before I can make any further progress, I need to see the bodies of Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo, who've been trying to frame this post-killer by saying they died of blood loss due to slit throats. However, I know for a fact that bastard did that to try to throw me off.
Wow. Hoofman lied through his teeth about the cause of death. We inspected the bodies, and no signs of trauma were found, especially slit throats. Their throats are completely intact. In fact, we couldn't find any sort of conclusion to how they died. Nothing was found in the autopsy as well. It's as if they died out of nowhere.
Coltstein thought about Redheart's statement.
No trauma, no cause. I believe I know what killed them, but I like to see the bodies to determine if they missed anything that could relate to what I found in the case. Thank you for information, Redheart, but I still would like to see the bodies.
Redheart nodded her head, leading Coltstein to the bodies on the far side of the room. She uncovered the bodies of the 2 small fillies, both with a large, stitched cut down their chests. Both were pale and as cold as ice, but Coltstein didn't need much to determine what he suspected. He inspected Scootaloo first, looking over her small body carefully, and just like Redheart had stated, there was absolutely no trauma on the body. Next, he moved over to Sweetie Belle, inspecting her closely. Once again, no signs of trauma were found, so he turned away from the bodies, trying to piece together what could have possibly happened that night.
Think, Coltstein. There's no way that Aquee could have killed them, because they didn't die of any sort of illness or trauma. How did those really die?
Just when he was about to abandon his thoughts, he remembered a tip that he had learned back in law school.
I cannot give up. I just need to retrace what I've learned. Okay, I learned that Aquee hallucinated the entire situation with Diamond Tiara and Silver Spoon. The medicine given to her by Cora is the cause of the hallucination. She was possessed by Annie. Our unmarking was performed that night before the murders. She became aware of the horrid act the day of the murders. Aquee and her friends went camping and came back acting strange. There's only two ways to become possessed by Annie. There was an unmarking that night of the murders, and she was drugged during each unmarking. Now, piece all the evidence together, Coltstein.
He thought hard about all of the evidence, using every bit of his past knowledge as a helper. A number of minutes passed before almost every bit of the evidence had become clear.
It would make sense. Aquee and her friends went camping in the woods, where the witch's home is located. Aquee became aware of the legend, and like any other filly, went looking for it. She found it along with Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle, resulting in all three of them getting possessed. For being out in the woods for too long, all three of them caught a cold, resulting in Aquee going to Scarlet and containing the medicine. All three of them took the medicine, and not long after, resulting from the trip, hallucinated Diamond Tiara and Silver Spoon, ripping up their chance, creating the spark. All three of them grew tired of their bullying, resulting in the first unmarking. However, it wasn't the medicine's effect that caused them to feel as though he committed the unmarkings. It was Anastina's, which she took advantage of when all three were at their most vulnerable. The three of them continued to take the medicine, resulting in more unmarkings. Applejack became an innocent victim of Annie, resulting in her hiding the cutie in that chest and being forced not to say a word. The madness continued to happen for a period of 3 weeks before Aquee finally woke up that morning, only to see a bloody knife on the bedroom floor and noticed that her bow was missing. She searched and couldn't find it until she took a trip back to the clubhouse, only to find a blood-soaked bow along the path. Annie told Aquee continue the unmarkings, otherwise she would kill her friends, and agrees. Night came, and unmarking took place. Aquee refused to listen to Annie anymore, and as a punishment, Annie kills Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo by taking their souls for her own power. The only question is, who was unmarked that night? It is all clear to me, except for one piece of the case,
he said to himself.
You got something, Coltstein?
Yes, Bronson, everything about this case makes sense, except for one thing.
Wait, do you know how these two died?
Thank you for your time. Now, if you excuse me, I have an important therapy session to get to.
Bronston gave Coltstein a strange look. Coltstein decided to not say anything, seeing he'd just confuse Bronston and Red Heart. Coltstein walked out of the room, ready to end the madness once and for all.
Time to end this madness, for good.
Coltstein sat on his chair, looking at Applebloom. Her mane was a mess, and she seemed more pale than usual, raising a red flag for Coltstein, knowing that this session was going to be his most challenging. Annie was here, listening to everything that he spoke, and every question that he had for Applebloom that had to do with putting the case to rest. He knew that Applebloom knew who was on the table that night, and he was going to squeeze the truth from her. This was it, his last chance to get the truth. Applebloom stared at him, fear within her eyes.
She's here, Doctor. I know she is,
she said in a frightened tone. Coltstein gave her an assuring look.
I know she is, Applebloom. I can feel her,
he assured. He prepared himself for the worst, grabbing the book he had come across in the Canterlot library within his hooves.
Time to spill the truth, Applebloom. I investigated deeper in this case, and I know you ain't telling me the full truth. I also know how your friends died, and it wasn't you that did it, only Annie.
Applebloom could not hide anymore, but she was afraid to speak.
I've only lied because I was too afraid to tell the truth. Annie said she'd kill me if I said anything.
I am aware of your struggles, Applebloom, but you can't be afraid of her anymore. I can assure you, you are safe with me.
Applebloom paused, taking in a deep breath and letting it out.
Okay, Doctor. I'll promise to stay strong for you.
Good, Applebloom. Now, let me state something. I talked to your friend, Sakura, and she stated that you took the medicine because you wouldn't leave without it. Is this true?
It's true, but it wasn't because I wanted it. Only because Annie forced me to beg Sakura for the medicine, but she wouldn't tell me why. This is before Annie showed her true colors.
Coltstein was immediately intrigued. Annie presented herself as an apparition of something else before all of this chaos had started. He decided to question Applebloom further.
Explain to me, Applebloom, what did Annie look like before she presented her true form?
She looked like any other pony, and she stated that she was looking for friends.
Coltstein smiled. Applebloom was not holding back. She truly was going against Annie's demands, so he proceeded to his next question.
Where did you meet Annie, Applebloom?
It wasn't just me, but Scootaloo and Belle too. We decided to go crusading in a supposed haunted forest while we were on a camping trip. All three of us had heard of some legend and decided to go looking for it to determine if the legend was real or not. We went looking and found an old house in the forest. So, being curious, we entered the house, said some chant that refers to the legend, and Annie appeared out of nowhere.
Where did you learn of the legend? And who told you the chant?
Sheriff told me.
Very good, Applebloom. Why did Annie show her true form? What happened?
Applebloom hesitated, but knowing she had to be strong, she continued to recuperate.
Because I attempted to disobey her, and she had control of me.
Coltstein was intrigued, wanting to know more.
How did she have control of you?
Applebloom was silent, struggling to speak.
I haven't been completely honest with you, Doctor. Something happened in that house, and I now see it's nothing but a greedy mistake on my part.
Coltstein noticed Applebloom's voice fall to the tone of a scared child. He was concerned as he spoke to the scared filly.
What happened, Applebloom? It's time to be honest.
Applebloom could see that he was not kidding, so she swallowed all the fear that she had and finally spoke the truth that Coltstein had been wanting to hear.
I made a deal with her. She told me that if I would be her friend, she'd give me my cutie mark. Foolishly, I agreed. And just like she promised, a cutie mark appeared.
Coltstein thought back to the clubhouse, where he found the 2 slabs of flesh on the table. Could that cutie mark had been Applebloom's?
What was the cutie mark?
Asked Coltstein, his tone growing more sincere. Applebloom attempted to answer, but was stopped. She had started to groan and struggle violently, immediately concerning the doctor. He attempted to help Applebloom, but was stopped by her.
She's here! Stay away, Doctor!
Coltstein did not know whether to follow her demand or to intervene with his only defense. He was shaking, watching Applebloom struggle against Annie. He had to be strong for Applebloom, seeing she was too weak to fight against a demon as powerful as Annie. Coltstein could not take it anymore, grabbed the book, and shoved inward toward Applebloom.
Doctor, get back!
If you can't fight her, then I must!
He yelled, planting the book against Applebloom's forehead, following a sizzling sound. Applebloom let out a screech that nearly shattered Coltstein's eardrums. The screech was unlike anything he had ever heard, even worse than his first encounter with Applebloom's possession. The room had started to shake, knocking books from their shelves. The clock on the far side of the room falling and breaking, and the only window within the room shattering. The eyes of the young filly had started to glow, and her mouth had started to leach blood. The sight terrified Coltstein, but he continued to hold the book on the surface of Applebloom's forehead, remaining strong for the filly. Coltstein struggled as the screech continued to shake the room, and Applebloom's eye socket started to leak a black liquid, falling to the floor. The liquid seemed like a blood, but it clearly was not, due to the liquid forming into what seemed like a large wall, closing around Coltstein. He wasn't sure what to do, but knew that he was in danger, continuing to hold the book against her forehead. The screech had become more mild, converting into a sinister laugh. Applebloom's teeth had become daggers, and her skin had become pale, all of her blood vessels visible beneath the skin.
You can't save her, no matter what you do.
The voice was not Applebloom's. It was much more dark and grotesque.
Be silent! Listen to me, you monster! I'm gonna save her and remove you from assistance. You hear me? Be gone!
Commanded Coltstein, pressing the book harder against Applebloom's forehead. Annie shrieked as Coltstein continued to pressurize the book. Annie retracted as Applebloom returned to normal, scared and paranoid. The black liquid that had leached from Applebloom's eyes had disappeared, and her teeth had reformed back to their original state.
Are you okay?
Asked Coltstein, holding Applebloom in his hooves.
I don't know.
It's alright, Applebloom. You're safe now.
Both of them smiled, but just when all seemed safe, Applebloom started to struggle once again, her head turning violently.
Applebloom! Fight her!
Applebloom could not fight, and spoke quickly while she still could.
The cutie mark was an apple and a pentagram. It was the only way. I had to be unmarked.
Coltstein felt her body fall to dead weight, staring at the innocent filly in his hooves. He wanted to fall to tears, but knew that he had to be strong. He let out a scream, causing Daisy to barge into the room, noticing Coltstein's condition.
Doctor, are you alright?
Coltstein did not answer, setting Applebloom's dead body on the couch as gently as he could.
Is she?
Asked Daisy, noticing Coltstein's expression become more angry.
No, I can't refuse to let this end like this.
Daisy looked at him, confusion in her gaze.
She's dead, Doctor. There's nothing you can do now.
Coltstein shook his head.
Listen to me, Daisy. Get the 4 equestrian crosses. Place them on every wall in her room. Shut the window in the room and escort Applebloom to her room.
Daisy did not know what to do. How could Applebloom be saved? She was dead.
I don't understand.
Coltstein had become infuriated.
Just trust me. I refuse to let it end in another death. Just do what I say. She's not dead. Only plain dead.
Are you sure?
Yes, it's time to perform the exorcism and prove to her innocence. I want this exorcism recorded. It's time to put Annie to rest. For good.
Daisy nodded her head.
I'll prepare everything. And I hope you're right about this.
I am. Trust me. You may fool the others, but you don't fool me. It's time to end your madness. Forever!
One hour had passed since Applebloom went limp in Coltstein's hooves, and the entire facility had gone quiet at the mentioning of an exorcism. To prepare himself, Coltstein soaked himself with some holy water, obtained a first edition equestrian Bible, and rephrased a large number of prayers multiple times. Coltstein was afraid, but he knew that Annie was just playing with him, and he had grown tired of playing games. It was time to end this game of insanity once and for all. As night approached, he took what could have been his last trip to the bathroom. He didn't need to go one or two. He just needed a boost of confidence, seeing he had no idea what was going to happen. He did know one thing, and that was that he might not live to see tomorrow. And he was going to push every bit of his strength to its highest peak, hoping for him to break. But he had a life to save, and despite the outcome, would give every bit of what he had to do it. He shut the bathroom door behind him, locking it, and stood before the sink, staring at his reflection in the mirror. Coltstein had heard that mirrors can work as gateways for both the holy and unholy, so he kept his distance. Annie was watching him right now, and she could act when he least expected it. She could easily jump out of that mirror and take him to the depths of hell, or just kill him on the spot. There was no telling what would happen. He just prayed that Celestia and Luna's guidance was on his side.
This is it, Coltstein. Your chance to make everything right. Your chance to put a monster to rest for good.
His words echoed within the bathroom as he thought back to the times before becoming a private detective. He had a sister. Her name was Dazzling Shores, and she wasn't the nicest pony, mainly a troublemaker, due to her influences not being the best. Coltstein was a keep-to-myself type of pony growing up, usually studying on a daily basis. He attempted to lead his sister on the right track, but eventually gave up, seeing his attempts ended up being useless. She usually tried to lead him on the wrong path, using trickery, and for that reason, he never had a relationship with his own sister. It wasn't until the accident that he truly realized how much he did love her. Coltstein was about 8 years old when it happened. He had decided to stay home to study for an event he had participated in at school, while his mother, father, and sister went out to see a movie at the local theater. One of the biggest mistakes he ever made. 2 hours passed, and he was sitting on his bed when the phone rang. The one phone call that he will remember for the rest of his life. It was the police, alerting Coltstein that his family had been killed in a drive-by shooting outside of the theater. All he remembered was dropping the phone and screaming so loud that it woke the neighbors. He also remembered throwing the book that he had been reading, only to break a window and punching a hole in the bedroom wall. He was eventually calmed by a neighbor that had overheard Coltstein's outrage, and he was escorted to the police station, where he was cared for, questioned, and escorted to Kennerlot Orphanage. The shooting made him finally realize just how much he truly cared for his sister, who he had argued with earlier that day, ending in him telling her that he wished that she were dead. He regrets ever saying those words, and hated himself for a long time for ever saying such horrid words. He looked at Apple Bloom as his sister, and the filly that had committed suicide inches from his face. And even though he had failed to save the others, this time, he refused to let it end in death.
You can do it, Coltstein. Do it for Dazzling.
He had started to cry, but quickly wiped away the tears.
No, no more tears. I must be strong. Stronger than ever before. I cannot fail again. I must proceed. No matter what. I must proceed!
His confidence had increased as he stared at himself in the mirror.
I must save her. Do it for that filly. Do it for Dazzling. Don't be afraid, Coltstein. You are stronger!
He felt confident as he took in a deep breath, turning from the mirror. The heaviness of Annie's presence was still with him, but he was not afraid. Not anymore.
It's time, Coltstein.
Just before he exited the bathroom, he stated one last statement.
Mom? Dad? Dazzling? I'm sorry I couldn't save any of you, but I promise, for all of you, I will succeed.
Daisy stood at her desk, next to Apple Bloom, secured in a wheelchair designed to restrain whoever was sitting in it. Coltstein was not taking any chances at Annie escaping him, so he needed Apple Bloom as constricted as possible. He felt horrible seeing Apple Bloom strapped to a chair, as if she were a prisoner, but he just had to remember that this was not Apple Bloom. It was Annie using her as a shield, just as she had the past month.
I did as you instructed. Her hooves are completely constricted.
You are absolutely sure?
She's not going anywhere, Doctor. Trust me.
Coltstein gave her a smile, kissing her lightly on the cheek.
I trust you.
The kiss surprised her as he attempted to turn away, only for her to pull him in toward her, planting his lips against hers. Coltstein did not retract and continued to kiss her. He had felt as if all of his troubles were lifted from his shoulders for just a second, but he quickly came to realization of what needed to be done. He pulled away from her, feeling stronger.
That was...
Coltstein could not define the feeling that he had just experienced, so Daisy sugarcoated his feeling.
It was something you hadn't felt for a long time, Doctor. It was love.
Coltstein hadn't realized just how long it had been since he felt love in his life. Daisy had hit the nail on the head, and as a response, he just smiled.
Daisy, seeing you are a unicorn, I need you to do something for me.
What is it?
She asked, noticing Coltstein grab something from his pocket.
The spell at the bottom of this sheet. I need you to perform it when I tell you. It will transport me into Annie, where I can finally end Annie for good.
Daisy expressed a look of worry, only to be quickly replaced by a look of confidence.
Very well, but on one condition.
What's the condition?
You come back after kicking that demon's butt.
She concluded, shocking Coltstein. Coltstein nodded confidently.
I will.
He stated as Daisy grabbed the wheelchair and rolled it out of the room. The couple arrived just outside of Apple Bloom's room, where Coltstein signaled Daisy to stop.
You put up the crosses, right?
Just as you instructed.
Good. Now, we need to be ready for anything, because once we hit that room, all hell will break loose. Remain strong. No matter what.
Daisy nodded her head as she rolled the wheelchair closer to the room, already starting to notice a difference. The wheelchair was getting harder to push. The room was starting to vibrate, and an unpleasant sound was starting to fill the room. She continued to push until they were at the door opening, and immediately a demonic shriek erupted from Apple Bloom, nearly piercing the eardrums of Coltstein and Daisy.
Told you she wasn't dead,
said Coltstein as he violently rolled the wheelchair into the room, noticing 4 video cameras set up in each corner of the room. All of them were running due to the red light blinking on all of them. Coltstein entered, along with Daisy, shutting the door behind them. The shrieking continued to the point of where Coltstein and Daisy adapted, not being fazed by Annie anymore. Coltstein prepared to speak the equestrian prayer, hearing Annie speak in Latin as if she were in pain. Coltstein gripped a cross, while Daisy held the wheelchair in place. The entire facility was shaking as Coltstein prepared to recite the prayer.
By the sunshine and moon's light, as shadows cast and the night sky, the mortal rose of day and night, creating peace upon pony kind.
Coltstein thrusted the cross toward Annie, causing her to growl. The growl was sinister, but Coltstein remained strong, thrusting the cross closer to Annie's face. Just like before, Applebloom's teeth had changed to daggers. Her eyes had went pitch black, and her pupils were blood red. Coltstein could see that he was affecting Annie, so he continued.
Shadows created darkness. Darkness created evil. Evil created disorder. Disorder was sealed.
Annie continued to struggle, desperately trying to get out of the chair. Coltstein almost had her, and with only a few phrases left, he had to push her to the point of manifestation. He continued, struggling to keep his balance due to the entire facility shaking.
Through the power of the sun and moon, harmony was created of 6 elements. Laughter, honesty, loyalty, generosity, kindness, and magic.
Rephrasing the elements caused Annie to struggle violently, releasing a sinister moan, and the floor beneath them had even started to crack from the force within the room. Coltstein was close, so he spoke the last bit of the prayer that would lead to the next step.
With harmony, peace came to extinguish the wicked. With the elements, the mortal created friendship.
Annie shrieked so loud that the room felt as if it were going to collapse, following a sick-sounding moan. Coltstein signaled Daisy to be ready for the spell, as he spoke the final phrase, hoping for Annie to manifest herself within Applebloom.
Annie of the wicked, I have the power over you. Show yourself!
The room suddenly stopped shaking, and Annie had gone silent. Coltstein continued to hold the cross toward Annie, as he heard a sinister laugh erupt from Annie. She raised her head up, looking directly at Coltstein. She continued to laugh in her full manifestation, as Coltstein examined the evil that had plagued him for so long, now fully visible to him for the first time. Her eyes were pitch black with blood-red pupils. Her teeth were daggers, chipped and deteriorated. Her flesh was a pale yellow with all the blood vessels visible, and her tongue was long and thin, much like a serpent's.
Here I am, Doctor. How do you do?
Said Annie, wobbling her head around, attempting to anger Coltstein. Her voice was low, raspy, and sinister, but Coltstein did not answer, only stared at the demon, unoffended.
What's the matter, dog? Cat got your tongue. I'm sorry we must meet like this, but I've loved to torture your ass ever since I killed that pathetic little nuisance that night.
She was attempting to anger him, but he kept his anger level at 0, continuing to stare at Annie.
Oh, how long I have wanted a vessel, and thanks to you, I now have one. You can't save her anymore. She's mine now. I've won. You've lost. Her soul is mine forever. You can't win. She's gone. You will never get her back.
Annie erupted a sinister laughter, but Coltstein remained calm. Annie continued to laugh as Coltstein finally spoke to his adversary.
You're right, Annie. I cannot win. Not like this. However, I can win another way. Daisy, now!
Daisy did as he commanded and cast the spell, immediately sending him into the depths of Annie's mind. He fell from a pitch-black sky and landed on the hard ground, where he struggled to catch his breath. He quickly remembered where he was and stood up from the ground. Coltstein took a minute to study his surroundings, which was the outskirts of a foggy forest.
Welcome to hell, Coltstein,
he said to himself, entering the void of Annie's mind. The forest where she lived.